Welcome, and thank you for being here. This is the Sleep Science Channel. Tonight, we explore something many people feel but rarely put into words. A kind of inner motion, a quiet restlessness. It's the sense that you're always looking for something, even when you don't know exactly what it is. You might be going through life with a full schedule, busy days, a structured routine, and yet there's this subtle undertow pulling at your attention. A whisper in the back of your mind that says, there's more. Not necessarily more success, more money, or more possessions, but more meaning, more clarity, more certainty, more connection. Or maybe just something different, something that finally makes you feel complete. This is what we're calling the psychology of always searching. It shows up in many ways. Some people change jobs often, or hobbies, or homes. Some start new goals every few weeks, only to lose interest once the initial excitement fades. Others scroll endlessly, read dozens of books, follow self-help advice, or keep themselves busy with plans and possibilities, hoping that somewhere in the mix, the missing piece will appear. For some, it feels like an invisible itch, something they can't quite reach but can never ignore. A drive that doesn't go away. This isn't about being ambitious. It's not about wanting to improve your life or evolve as a person. Those are healthy desires. What we're exploring here is something more persistent. It's the constant searching. Even when nothing seems wrong, even when life is fine, even when you've achieved things you once thought would satisfy you, the feeling of incompleteness stays. So why does that happen? Why do some people feel like they're always looking for something just out of reach? Why can a sense of meaning or direction be so elusive even when you've done everything right? To understand this, we need to talk about a few key areas: early psychological development, identity formation, emotional regulation, dopamine cycles, uncertainty tolerance, attachment styles, and even the cultural stories we grow up with. These are the building blocks of how our minds search, and why that search sometimes never seems to end. Let's start with development. From a very young age, the human brain is wired to seek, to explore, to find patterns, to resolve tension. Babies search for faces, toddlers search for reactions, children search for approval. Our minds are built around the idea that if we look, we'll find. That seeking leads to solving, and solving leads to safety. This is adaptive. It helped us survive and evolve. But in the modern world, the targets of that seeking have changed. We're not looking for food or shelter. We're often looking for meaning, purpose, belonging, certainty, things that don't always have clear answers. And here's where it gets complex. If a child grows up in an environment where their emotional needs weren't consistently met, even in subtle ways, their brain may internalize a message that something is always missing. Not necessarily in words, but in emotional patterns. They might grow into adults who are emotionally attuned, intelligent, even successful, but still haunted by a sense that something isn't quite right. Not broken, not damaged, just unfinished. As if life is a puzzle with one piece left out. This early experience can shape how the adult self relates to satisfaction. If you learned early on that connection was inconsistent, that love or approval had to be earned, or that it could disappear, then safety itself might feel temporary. You might keep searching for new situations, people, or roles that finally provide a lasting sense of certainty. But none of them do, not fully, because The part of you that's still searching never learned how to rest. That brings us to identity. When we don't have a clear or stable sense of self, we often look outward to define it. We search for roles to play, communities to join, ideas to believe in. We try on different versions of ourselves. There's nothing wrong with this. It's part of growing. But when the core sense of self is too fragile or undefined, the search never stops. Because each role, each identity is only a placeholder. It soothes the uncertainty for a while, but then the doubts return. You start asking, is this really me? And the search begins again. This pattern is deeply connected to emotional regulation. For many people, the act of searching becomes a form of distraction. When we feel low-grade discomfort, anxiety, boredom, emptiness, self-doubt, we instinctively try to soothe it. Some people turn to substances, others to achievement, but many turn to searching. It feels productive. It gives the illusion of progress. It tells you that you're doing something about the discomfort, but often the act of searching becomes the very thing that keeps the discomfort alive. Because if you're always searching, you never fully arrive. There's also a neurological piece to this. The brain's dopamine system plays a major role in how we experience desire and reward. Contrary to popular belief, dopamine is not about pleasure. It's about anticipation. It's what makes you click one more video, check one more app, imagine one more possibility. The dopamine system is activated during the pursuit of something, not the arrival. That means the brain rewards you more for searching than for finding. This is why the chase can feel more stimulating than the result. And for some people, that loop becomes addictive. Not in the traditional sense, but in the sense that stopping feels like losing momentum, like being stuck. Restlessness becomes the baseline. So even if you do find something meaningful, a person, a purpose, a moment of peace, the high doesn't last. The brain starts scanning again. What's next? There's also the issue of uncertainty tolerance. Some people struggle to tolerate the feeling of not knowing. They'd rather be in motion, even if it's exhausting, than sit still in the unknown. This is often linked to anxiety. Movement, whether mental or physical, gives the illusion of control. Searching feels safer than stopping. Because stopping means you might have to face the discomfort underneath the questions. And then there's culture. The world we live in constantly tells us we should be searching for more. More productivity, more self-improvement, more beauty, more experiences. The idea that you should be content with what you have is often framed as laziness or stagnation. We're taught that satisfaction is suspicious, that stillness is unambitious. So we internalize the idea that we're supposed to feel like something's missing, because that's what drives consumerism, innovation, progress. But it also leaves many people quietly exhausted, because the search never ends. And all of this development, identity, emotion, dopamine, uncertainty, culture, it creates a perfect storm, a psychological loop where searching becomes a personality trait rather than a temporary state. You become someone who is always looking, even when you don't know what for. You might recognize this in yourself. Maybe you've felt it for years. Maybe you've hidden it behind busyness or optimism or routines. Maybe you've learned to live with it, to make it part of your ambition, your creativity, your drive. But still, on quiet nights, it returns. The thought, is this all there is, or is there something else I should be doing, becoming, discovering? And that question keeps you moving. Let's stay with that for a moment. Not to solve it, but to see it clearly. Because the more clearly we understand the reasons behind this search, the more gently we could begin to live alongside it, or maybe slowly begin to rest. Some people describe this internal state as a kind of low-grade dissatisfaction. It's not unhappiness in the traditional sense. It's not depression, though the two can overlap. It's more like a subtle hum of not quite enough. You can be grateful for what you have, intellectually aware of your progress, and still feel like something remains unresolved. This inner dissonance can be difficult to explain to others, especially in a world that often measures fulfillment by external milestones. You might have the job, the relationship, the achievements, and still feel like you're waiting for something to click into place. Not because you're ungrateful, but because something in your internal map keeps pointing forward, away from here, towards something else. This psychological state isn't random. It often stems from a particular configuration of temperament, early environment, and learned beliefs. Some people are naturally high in something called openness to experience, a personality trait associated with curiosity, imagination, and a hunger for novelty. People high in this trait often feel most alive when they're discovering something new, whether that's an idea, a place, or a part of themselves. But novelty has a paradox. It fades. And for those who chase the feeling of discovery, the absence of it can feel like emotional flatness. So they move on, not because they're disloyal or unfocused, but because their inner world feels too quiet when they're not reaching for something new. Layer on top of that the emotional patterns learned early in life, especially in families where emotions weren't openly discussed or where approval was conditional, and you get a recipe for perpetual movement. A child who learned that they had to perform, achieve, or please in order to be valued might grow into an adult who never quite feels at rest. Even in moments of success, they may wonder if it's enough. If they are enough. The inner reward system becomes calibrated not to have, but to seek. So the act of arriving somewhere, emotionally or literally, brings with it a kind of confusion. What now? There's also something important to understand about the role of imagination in this process. The human brain is exceptionally good at constructing imagined futures. It can build possibilities with vivid emotional tone. These imagined futures, careers, lifestyles, relationships become emotionally charged. We begin to feel not only curious about them, but attached to them. We invest hope, identity, and meaning into things that haven't happened yet. In a way, we begin to grieve the version of ourselves we could be if only we made the right move, found the right answer, met the right person, or unlocked the right path. So the search isn't just about finding something new. It's about aligning with an imagined version of self that feels more authentic, more fulfilled, more alive. That's a powerful motivator. But it can also create a chronic dissatisfaction with the present, because the present will always feel like a lesser version of the imagined future. And so the searching continues. This loop becomes even more complicated when the search gets wrapped up in identity. For many people, especially those who have felt out of place or misunderstood at key stages of life, the process of self-discovery becomes central to how they see themselves. They become someone who is on a journey, someone who is figuring it out. This isn't inherently negative. Growth is a natural and important part of life. But when the journey becomes the identity, the idea of arriving somewhere can feel disorienting. If you're always becoming, what happens when you stop and simply are? That question can feel threatening, especially if your sense of self-worth is tied to your capacity to evolve. In this way, the constant searching becomes emotionally safe. Even if it's tiring, it provides direction. It shields you from the vulnerability of stillness, because stillness might invite difficult questions. It might force you to confront what remains unresolved when all the noise stops. The search, in contrast, gives you something to do, something to move toward, something to talk about. It allows you to avoid the deeper emotional territories that might emerge if you stopped and listened carefully to what's underneath. For some, this searching is external. It takes the shape of changing cities, jobs, partners, aesthetics, or social circles. For others, it's internal, a quest for understanding, spirituality, healing, or clarity. But both forms of searching are driven by a similar energy, the hope that something will finally click, that the internal gap between who you are and who you want to be will close, that the anxiety of incompleteness will dissolve. And when it doesn't, when each new discovery eventually fades into familiarity, the disappointment can quietly reinforce the belief that you're still not there, still not finished, still not fully you. This is where a sense of exhaustion begins to build. Even if the search feels purposeful, even if it brings new insights and new experiences, there's often an emotional cost. Over time, people begin to feel worn down by the cycle of hope and disillusionment. Each new beginning carries with it the weight of past efforts that didn't deliver the lasting satisfaction they promised. And yet stopping feels even worse, because without the search, what remains? Sometimes what remains is discomfort, old emotional wounds, unprocessed grief, questions you've been too busy to ask, parts of yourself you've been trying to outrun. And so the search continues, not necessarily out of hope, but out of necessity. Because without it, you might have to sit with feelings you don't yet know how to hold. But what if part of the answer lies not in what you search for, but in how you relate to the searching itself? Instead of seeing it as a problem to fix, what if you recognized it as a signal, a messenger from a deeper part of you that's trying to speak? The search may not be about finding one perfect thing that finally resolves everything. It may be about learning to hear the emotional layers underneath the motion. What are you really looking for? Not on the surface, but underneath. Is it safety, connection, belonging, permission to slow down, to stop trying to earn your worth? Sometimes the act of naming the real longing behind the search is the first step toward rest. Not because you've solved the puzzle, but because you've stopped pretending that the puzzle is external. You've turned your attention inward, not in a self-indulgent way, but in a curious and compassionate one. That shift changes things. It doesn't remove the desire to grow or explore, but it softens the urgency. It allows you to search with more awareness, to notice when the act of reaching has become a substitute for feeling. To pause when you realize you're chasing a moving target, not because it's meaningful, but because it distracts you from discomfort. To ask, what part of me feels unfinished? And can I sit with it instead of running from it? This kind of internal pause isn't easy. It asks for courage. It asks you to befriend the parts of you that feel uncertain, unresolved, or afraid. It asks you to trust that even without answers, you are still whole, still allowed to rest, still worthy of care, even if you haven't figured it all out. And perhaps in that space, the searching becomes something different. Not a desperate chase for missing pieces, but a quieter exploration, one that doesn't demand constant motion, one that allows you to breathe, to notice, to receive. When we talk about people who are always searching, it's important to acknowledge that they often carry a great deal of inner intelligence. These are not people who are lost in a chaotic way. In fact, many of them are highly introspective. They ask big questions. They care about meaning. They notice the invisible threads between choices, emotions, and experiences. The search is not shallow. It's often deep, heartfelt, and serious. But it can also become overwhelming when it lacks direction, or when direction constantly changes. The mind grows used to transition. It becomes uncomfortable with stillness, as if staying in one place too long means missing out on something better elsewhere. This creates a loop that's not quite anxiety and not quite ambition, but something in between, a restless pursuit of something that hasn't yet revealed itself. This pattern often intersects with modern culture in ways that make it even harder to escape. We live in an age of endless options. You can change your career path, your location, your social circle, even your appearance with relative ease. You can browse thousands of life paths through social media in a matter of minutes. This creates what psychologists call choice overload. The paradox is that more choice doesn't always create more satisfaction. It can actually make people feel more anxious, less certain, and more prone to regret. When you have 5 options and you choose one, it's easier to commit. But when you have 500, the choice never feels final. There's always a lingering thought. Did I choose the right one? Was there a better one? And when that doubt enters your emotional system, it becomes harder to feel rooted in your own life. Even if the choice you made is good, even if you're in a place that once felt like exactly what you wanted, there's still a subtle question in the background. Is there more? This isn't just a personal issue, it's a systemic one. The way we're marketed to, the way platforms are designed, all play on this searching instinct. Algorithms are optimized to keep you in motion. If you pause, even for a moment, you're shown something new, something better, something that claims to solve the thing you didn't even know was missing. And it works, because your brain is wired to seek. The dopamine loop is activated again, and the search continues. This is why content that promises answers is so appealing. People who are always searching are often drawn to systems, frameworks, personality tests, philosophies, or belief systems that promise clarity. Not because they're gullible, quite the opposite. It's because they're tired of ambiguity. They want something to hold on to, something that makes sense of the inner movement. But even these systems can become part of the pattern. You discover one framework, explore it, apply it, and then the itch returns. You wonder if there's another lens, another layer, another key you've missed. It's not wrong to explore. It's not wrong to change perspectives. But when the pursuit of understanding becomes a kind of emotional escape, it can leave you feeling more fragmented, not less. Another layer to this is the relationship between searching and self-worth. Many people carry an unconscious belief that they are only valuable when they are improving, that who they are now is not enough, that they must always be evolving, learning, transforming in order to deserve rest or acceptance. This belief often comes from childhood environments where love, praise, or attention was conditional. You were praised for achievements, for progress, for growth, but rarely for just being. So you internalize the idea that being is not enough. You must be becoming. This belief can become a quiet engine that powers the search. You may not even notice it at first. It might sound like motivation, it might feel like ambition, but underneath there's often fear. Fear of being stagnant, fear of being unworthy, fear of being forgotten or irrelevant if you're not moving toward something. This fear keeps you from fully landing in your own life. Even in beautiful moments, there's a part of your mind that's already thinking ahead, planning the next step, scanning the horizon. The tragedy is that this constant forward movement often prevents people from truly experiencing their own lives. Joy becomes diluted by anticipation. Peace becomes interrupted by preparation. Rest becomes guilt. Because if you're not searching, what are you doing? This is a heavy emotional load to carry, especially when it's invisible to others. On the outside, people may see someone who is driven, curious, engaged, but inside, that person may feel untethered. Not in crisis, but never fully at peace, not lost, but never fully home. Some try to manage this by becoming serial restarters. They move from one path to another, hoping that this time it will stick. This time the new city, new job, new relationship, or new version of themselves will be the one that finally quiets the inner hum. And sometimes, for a while, it works. There is a honeymoon phase of searching, a burst of energy that comes with change. But eventually, the pattern resurfaces. The uncertainty returns, and the process begins again. Others go the opposite route. They stay in one place physically, but mentally they live in a constant swirl of possibilities. They research, fantasize, plan, compare, observe. Their search is internal. They may never act on it, but it's always there, simmering below the surface. It keeps them emotionally distant from the present, because part of their attention is always elsewhere, in the imagined life that might be better, more fulfilling, more right. And still others burn out. The search becomes too exhausting. They stop chasing, not out of peace, but out of fatigue. They go numb. They move through life in a kind of emotional autopilot, not because they found what they were looking for, but because they no longer believe it exists. This resignation can look like acceptance, but often it's just a quieter form of despair, a giving up that masks itself as calm. So what's the alternative? Not to reject the search entirely, but to understand its roots, to befriend the part of you that is always looking, not to silence it, but to learn what it truly needs. Often that part of you is not asking for answers, it's asking for safety, for presence, for permission to exist even in uncertainty. That's why stillness can feel so hard, because it means being with yourself without distraction. It means letting go of the performance of growth and actually feeling what's underneath. And that can be uncomfortable. It can bring up grief, disappointment, old wounds, unmet needs. But it can also bring clarity. Not the kind of clarity that comes from solving a puzzle, but the kind that comes from knowing yourself, even in the absence of answers. You may find in that stillness that the search transforms. It stops being a chase and becomes a listening, a curiosity that isn't frantic but gentle, a sense of openness that doesn't need to fix everything immediately. In that space, new insights arise. You begin to recognize when your actions are driven by fear versus desire. You notice when you're using movement to escape rather than to explore. You develop a deeper trust in your ability to stay in your body, in your moment, in your current experience, even when it's uncomfortable. This doesn't mean you stop growing. It means your growth becomes integrated, rooted. You begin to feel the difference between external movement and internal depth, between chasing something and living from something, between seeking and being. And maybe, just maybe, that is the peace you were looking for all along. One of the most misunderstood aspects of people who are always searching is how deeply they can feel things. It's not that they're emotionally disconnected, quite the opposite. They often feel everything very acutely, which is part of why they keep moving. It's not the absence of emotion that fuels the search, but the intensity of it. The search becomes a strategy to manage that intensity. If they stay in one place too long, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, the weight of unprocessed feelings begins to rise. Searching keeps that at bay. It gives structure to something that otherwise might feel overwhelming. It creates the illusion of progress, even when there is no clear destination. And yet, this constant movement can create emotional dissonance, because even as you're moving towards something, you're also aware, deep down, that you're not really sure what it is you're hoping to find. You might convince yourself that it's a job or a place or a person. But when you get there, it often doesn't land with the clarity you expected. There might be a moment of satisfaction, a quiet yes, but then the hum returns. Not because you chose wrong, but because the hole you're trying to fill isn't external. This is why, for many, searching becomes spiritual. Not in a religious sense necessarily, but in a deeply personal one. You start to realize that the search isn't about the things you thought it was. It's not just about career fulfillment or ideal relationships. It's about something more elusive, a sense of home within yourself, a feeling of inner coherence, of knowing who you are and being okay with that, even when it's messy, incomplete, or unresolved. But for that feeling to develop, the nervous system must first feel safe. And here's the key. Many people who are always searching don't realize that their nervous system is constantly in a mild state of activation. Not full panic, but a background buzz. The system is alert, scanning, waiting, ready to adjust, ready to leave, ready to pivot. It's a state of low-level hypervigilance that becomes so familiar, it feels normal. You might not even know what true emotional rest feels like because you've always been anticipating something. Change, loss, disappointment, possibility. And that's why the search continues, because in a way it feels like safer to keep looking than to stop and rest. Rest can feel vulnerable, exposed, too quiet. But searching feels like action, like protection, like you're doing something to ensure your safety or worth, even if you can't explain exactly how or why. This pattern can go unnoticed for years. You might describe yourself as someone who's just ambitious, like curious, like driven or exploratory, and all of that can be true. But beneath those words, there's often a quieter story, one that says, I don't know how to feel okay, unless I'm moving. That story deserves attention. Not because it's wrong, but because it holds a key, a clue to the part of you that is still waiting to feel safe in stillness. Let's talk for a moment about how this affects relationships. People who are always searching often struggle with the tension between intimacy and freedom. They crave deep connection, emotionally rich, meaningful bonds, but also fear losing themselves in the process. They may enter relationships with intensity, driven by the hope that this person will finally make the world feel less fragmented. That in love they will find the rest they've been searching for, but then something shifts. The initial closeness begins to feel too settled, too defined, too known. And with that comes fear. Not necessarily of the other person, but of what the relationship represents. The end of searching, the closing of doors, the finality of this is it. And for someone who's built their emotional identity around exploration, that can feel threatening, not because the relationship is wrong, but because the search has always been the thing that gave life its energy. And now, faced with the possibility of peace, they feel unprepared to receive it. This creates an emotional bind. You want connection, but you also want escape. You want to be seen, but you're afraid of being fully known. You long for commitment, but fear it might mute the part of you that still wants to grow, to wander, to find. It's not immaturity. It's not selfishness. It's a deep psychological tension between rootedness and possibility and the fear that choosing one means losing the other. This can lead to a pattern where relationships begin intensely, then cool off. Not because the love is gone, but because the nervous system begins to panic. Searching has always been your home. Stillness feels unfamiliar. So you begin to pull away, or you start imagining other futures, not necessarily to act on them, but to emotionally recreate the feeling of movement, of searching, of being in between. Understanding this helps you hold compassion for yourself and for others who move through life this way. It's not about brokenness. It's about learning how to relate to your own inner landscape. Learning how to recognize when your search is a form of self-expression and when it's a way to avoid emotional discomfort. Because there is beauty in searching. There is creativity, curiosity, growth. Some of the most innovative, thoughtful, and emotionally rich people are those who never stop wondering, who are always asking questions, who are never quite finished. But without balance, the search can turn inward on itself. It can become a kind of exile where you're always almost arriving but never quite home. That's why the work isn't about stopping the search. It's about creating a home within it, finding a place inside yourself where you are allowed to rest even as you remain open to growth. A place where the questions don't have to be answered right away, where uncertainty is not a danger, but a space for becoming. This shift doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, a moment when you pause before chasing the next thing and ask yourself what feeling you're trying to escape. A moment when you feel the urge to start over and instead stay a little longer with what is. A moment when you recognize that your worth isn't tied to your movement, that you are allowed to be enough, even when you are not searching. Over time, these small moments begin to rewire your sense of safety. They teach your body and mind that stillness is not stagnation, that commitment is not confinement, that being here, in this moment, in this version of yourself, is not the end of the story, but simply one chapter that also deserves to be lived. Another important dynamic in the psychology of always searching is the connection between searching and control. Many people who are constantly looking for something new, something better, something more aligned, something that finally feels right, are also unconsciously trying to control their experience of life. Not in a controlling or dominant way over dominant others, but in an internal way. A deep desire to manage uncertainty, to reduce risk, to preempt disappointment. Searching becomes a strategy, not just for discovery, but for protection. Because if you're always looking ahead, always analyzing the next move, always preparing for the next phase, you don't have to fully feel the vulnerability of the present. You don't have to sit in the rawness of not knowing. You're always a few steps removed, thinking, scanning, predicting. And that distance can feel like safety, but it's also exhausting. Because life is, by its nature, unpredictable. No matter how much you search or plan or optimize, there will always be variables you can't account for, always emotions you can't avoid, always changes you didn't expect. So if your sense of emotional safety depends on control, even the subtle control of knowing what's next, you'll always feel unstable. The ground will never feel solid for long. And so the search continues, not just as a quest for something better, but as a buffer against uncertainty. This is why the moment after a big decision can often feel so emotionally charged. You may feel temporary relief, as if the search has paid off. But very quickly, a new wave of questions arises. Did I make the right choice? What if something better comes along? What if I regret this? And underneath all those questions is the fear of surrender, the fear of letting go of control, the fear of committing to a path that you can't fully predict. People who are always searching are often also deeply sensitive to regret. Even the idea of regret can feel intolerable, so they try to prevent it in advance by endlessly comparing options, seeking advice, imagining every possible outcome. But this pre-living of decisions, running endless simulations in the mind, often leads to paralysis, or to a life filled with half commitments, where you're never fully in anything because part of you is always holding the door open to something else. And over time, this fractures your attention. It becomes harder to feel immersed in your life. Even in moments of connection, beauty, or success, there's a part of your awareness that's already reaching forward, wondering if this is the best it gets, or if there's more just around the corner. There's also a social component to this. When you're always searching, you often compare yourself, consciously or unconsciously, to others who seem to have found it. The people who look settled, who seem clear about who they are, what they want, where they're going. This can create a quiet inner pressure. You may start to wonder what's wrong with you. Why are you still questioning, still shifting, still moving when others appear rooted and resolved? But here's the truth. Almost everyone is searching in some way. Some people just do it more internally. Some hide it behind external stability. Some have simply grown tired of the chase and chosen to make peace with the imperfections of what is. The difference is not about who's searching and who's not. It's about how we relate to the search, whether it owns us or informs us, whether it defines our worth or simply reflects our curiosity. Understanding this helps you soften the inner critique. You start to realize that searching isn't a flaw. It's a form of awareness. You see that something is missing. You feel the gaps. You sense that there's more to uncover. That sensitivity is part of what makes you attuned, thoughtful, awake. But without balance, it can also become self-consuming. A loop where nothing is ever enough, because the moment you reach it, your mind is already scanning ahead. So the work is not to silence the search. It's to ground it, to recognize when it's serving you and when it's simply keeping you distracted. to notice the emotional triggers that send you back into seeking mode. Not to shame yourself, but to understand, I'm feeling uncertain right now. I'm feeling emotionally unsteady. And my old pattern is to reach for something new rather than sit with what's here. That awareness creates space. And in that space, you can begin to choose differently. You can begin to test what happens when you stay. When you resist the pull of the next idea, the next fix, the next fantasy. When you bring your full attention back to what is real, even if it's messy, imperfect, or incomplete. This is not about giving up on change. It's about changing from a different place, from a deeper sense of self, rather than a reactive urge to escape discomfort. Because true change, meaningful, integrated change, doesn't come from panic. It comes from presence, from clarity, from an inner alignment that says, this is not about chasing something, but about living more truthfully. That shift is subtle but powerful. It takes you out of the mode of constant striving and into a place of deeper listening. You begin to hear the difference between your surface level wants and your deeper needs. You learn to recognize when a search is fueled by fear and when it's guided by curiosity. You become less attached to outcomes and more interested in what's unfolding now. And slowly, the emotional texture of your life changes. You feel less urgency, less pressure, less fragmentation. You begin to see beauty not just in the new, but in the familiar, in the ordinary, in the parts of your life that once felt too quiet to matter. This doesn't mean the search ends, it just means it evolves. It becomes less about filling a void and more about expanding into your own depth. Less about fixing yourself and more about discovering who you've always been beneath the noise. You may still explore, still change, still wonder, but you'll do so from a place of inner stillness, a place that no longer demands that every step forward prove your worth. Because worth was never the question. The real question has always been, can I let myself be here now and trust that this moment, incomplete as it may be, is still part of the whole? It's worth exploring how this pattern and the search for something else affects the way people experience time. Not just in the scheduling sense, but emotionally. People who are always searching often have a strained relationship with the present. The current moment is rarely a destination. It's a checkpoint, a temporary stop on the way to somewhere else. This can lead to a sense of restlessness that feels existential, not just situational. Even when life is going well, it can feel like you're not really in it. Like you're always mentally projecting into the future, rehearsing better versions of yourself, trying to accelerate your way to a more meaningful chapter. You might find yourself saying things like, once I figure this out, then I'll feel calm. Or, once I'm in the right environment, then I'll finally be myself. These statements are future loaded. They're based on the assumption that life will begin once a certain condition is met. And until then, you're in a holding pattern. But that holding pattern can last years or decades. It becomes the default state. You're technically living, but emotionally, you're always waiting. Waiting for clarity, for alignment, for the feeling that you've finally arrived. This emotional waiting room can be hard to recognize, especially when your outer life is full of activity. You might be busy, productive, even successful, but the underlying experience is one of delay, as if your real life is happening somewhere just beyond the horizon, and your job is to try and reach it. This experience of psychological time distortion is often accompanied by impatience. You might feel easily frustrated by how slowly things move, how long it takes to figure it all out. You might grow restless in situations that don't offer immediate feedback or clear progress. This impatience is not just about circumstances. It's rooted in the belief that until things are resolved, you can't settle. And because life is rarely that tidy, the settling never fully arrives. This impatience also shows up in the form of self-criticism. You may begin to ask, why haven't I found it yet? What am I missing? What's wrong with me? The longer the search goes on without resolution, the more likely it is that you turn the discomfort inward. It becomes a personal failing, a flaw to be fixed. But that only intensifies the search. Now you're not just looking for something out there, you're trying to fix something in here. The search becomes self-referential, a loop where the very act of seeking becomes the thing that makes you feel broken. There's a deep loneliness that can live inside this loop. Even if you're surrounded by people, even if you have support, there's often a sense that no one fully understands what you're looking for and how or why it matters so much. It's not just about goals or success. It's about a feeling that something is unresolved in your being, that there's a version of you you haven't met yet, and everything else feels incomplete until you do. This feeling is rarely talked about because it doesn't fit into neat emotional categories. It's not a crisis, it's not depression, it's not anxiety in the classic sense. It's a soft, persistent hum, a chronic orientation toward elsewhere. And because it's not dramatic, it often gets ignored by others and even by yourself. But its effects are real. It shapes your choices, your attention, your relationships, your energy. It can also affect your sense of identity. Over time, the idea of not being there yet becomes part of how you see yourself. You become someone who is in process, always transitioning, never quite finished. That can be empowering in the beginning. A sign that you're self-aware, growing, refusing to settle. But after a while, it can start to feel like a trap. Like you've built your life around the idea that you're always almost someone else. Almost clear, almost ready, almost free. So what happens when you stop asking, what's next? And start asking, what's here? That question can feel disorienting at first, because if you've been in motion for a long time, stillness can feel unnatural. You might even feel guilt or shame or fear. The parts of you that equate searching with progress will resist. They'll whisper, you're falling behind. You're missing your chance. You should be doing more. But those voices are not truth. They're echoes of old patterns, survival strategies that no longer serve your growth. Pausing does not mean giving up. It means shifting the frame, recognizing that searching doesn't always lead to answers, but presence can lead to understanding. When you slow down, when you listen inward instead of looking outward, you begin to notice things that constant motion kept hidden. You notice which desires are real and which are borrowed from culture or comparison. You notice which dreams still feel alive and which were meant only for a season. You notice the parts of you that have been waiting to be met, not with solutions, but with attention. And in that noticing, something changes. The pressure begins to ease. The timeline softens. You stop needing every step to be perfectly aligned because you trust yourself to respond, adjust, and grow, not from fear, but from self-connection. This doesn't make the search disappear, but it grounds it. It roots it in something deeper than dissatisfaction. It transforms the search from a desperate chase into a gentle unfolding, a way of being in the world that allows for both movement and rest, both desire and presence, both seeking and arriving, not as opposites, but as companions. There is no formula for this, no checklist, no final destination. But there is a rhythm, one that emerges when you stop demanding clarity from the future and start cultivating wholeness in the present. One that invites you to live your questions instead of rushing to answer them. One that reminds you the life you're seeking is not out there waiting to be found. It's already here, waiting to be lived. Sometimes the most revealing question you can ask yourself is, what would I do if I stopped searching? Not in a hypothetical way, but honestly, what parts of your life would change if you let go of the constant pursuit of the next answer, the next step, the next version of you? This question can stir discomfort because it challenges the assumption that searching is always virtuous. It asks you to examine what the search has cost you, emotionally, mentally, relationally. You might realize that in your effort to find something more meaningful, you've missed the meaning already present in small, ordinary moments. That in looking for your true self, you've ignored the parts of you that were already showing up, quietly asking to be accepted. That in chasing clarity, you've overlooked the wisdom that only emerges when you sit still long enough to listen. There's nothing wrong with wanting more. The human spirit is naturally expansive. But when more becomes a requirement for peace, you'll never arrive. Because there will always be another level, another breakthrough, another layer of the onion. Self-discovery is infinite. There is no end. The point is not to complete yourself like a project. The point is to relate to yourself differently, with more patience, with more gentleness, with more permission to be unfinished. This shift in mindset can profoundly change the emotional atmosphere of your life. Instead of feeling like you're running out of time, you begin to feel like you have time. Instead of measuring yourself against invisible progress bars, you begin to feel your way through your life moment by moment. Instead of waiting for everything to make sense, you become more willing to live in the questions. And perhaps, most importantly, you begin to notice where the original search came from. For many, the root of the search isn't ambition, it's pain. It's an ache left behind by early emotional experiences. Not being chosen, not being heard, not feeling safe, not feeling enough. The adult self builds sophisticated systems of goals and visions and plans. But underneath those systems is often a younger self still asking, am I okay? Am I loved? Do I belong? This doesn't mean you have to go digging into the past to heal. It means that some part of your adult searching may only be soothed by something that no achievement can provide. Self-compassion. The willingness to meet yourself, not at the finish line, but exactly where you are. To say, you're allowed to be here. You're allowed to not know. You're allowed to rest. And that rest is not just physical, it's emotional. It's the kind of rest that allows you to stop performing, to stop justifying, to stop earning your existence. When you reach that place, even for a few moments, something inside you begins to settle. The internal compass, once spinning wildly in all directions, begins to orient toward presence. Not because you figured everything out, but because you've decided to be with yourself as you are. This kind of presence is subtle. It doesn't come with fireworks or breakthroughs. It arrives quietly, in moments that feel almost too small to matter. The moment you stop refreshing your thoughts about the future and return to the feeling of your own breath. The moment you look around your space and actually see it. The moment you talk to someone without comparing, performing, or trying to solve anything. These are the moments that begin to create an inner atmosphere of safety. And from safety, clarity arises. Not always immediately, but gradually. Because when your body and mind feel safe, they don't have to scramble for answers. They don't have to leap forward. They can respond instead of react. They can explore without panic. They can be curious without rushing. And over time, the search evolves. It no longer comes from a place of deficiency. It comes from a place of richness. You're not chasing something to fill a gap. You're exploring something because it excites you, because it resonates, because it feels true. That shift from fear-based seeking to soul-based curiosity changes everything. You begin to notice when opportunities are genuine and when they're just distractions. You begin to feel when a decision aligns with your deeper self and when it's just feeding the old loop. You begin to know what enough feels like. That's something we don't talk about enough. The ability to recognize enough. In a world that constantly tells to want more, naming enough is radical. It's an act of maturity, of presence, of peace, and it often only becomes possible once you've stopped believing that you are not enough as you are. That doesn't mean you never change, evolve, or take new paths. It means that you no longer need change to justify your worth. You no longer need the future to save you from the present. You're no longer living in exile from your own life. And that is the deepest form of coming home. For many people, the moment they begin to truly understand their search is the moment they realize they are not alone in it. What once felt like a deeply personal confusion, a private sense of being different, out of sync or unfinished, starts to look more like a shared human experience. You begin to see it in the people around you, in their questions, in their sudden career pivots, in their restless scrolling, in their quiet dissatisfaction that they rarely put into words. You start to understand that this state of inner searching isn't just a personality quirk, it's a cultural condition. We live in a world that encourages constant evolution, but rarely teaches integration. We are taught to improve ourselves, to seek better outcomes, to become the next version of ourselves. But we are not often taught how to be with ourselves in the process. We know how to start things. We know how to chase. But we struggle with the middle, with the quiet parts, with the parts of the journey where there's no clarity, no momentum, no external validation. And so we label those parts as stuck, when really they might just be the spaces where real transformation is happening beneath the surface. One of the most powerful steps you can take is to shift how you interpret those in-between moments. Instead of seeing them as signs that you're off track, what if you saw them as part of the rhythm of your own becoming? What if the discomfort wasn't a problem to solve, but a signal that something inside you is making space? Space for new insights, new values, new forms of alignment that can't be rushed. In many ways, the psychology of always searching is a response to the pain of disconnection from self, from meaning, from a sense of home. And the only way to truly resolve that disconnection is through reconnection, not to an idea or a destination, but to yourself. The self that exists before the search. The self that was always there, even when you didn't know what you were looking for. This process of reconnection is slow, and sometimes it feels counterintuitive. If you're used to responding to discomfort with action, with planning, changing, escaping, then slowing down can feel like doing nothing. But in reality, it's an act of deep engagement. It's choosing to stay with yourself, even when you don't know what comes next. This staying is what allows your inner system to begin trusting again, trusting that you don't have to earn your worth, that you don't have to chase meaning in order to feel meaningful, that you don't have to reinvent yourself in order to be lovable or valid. The more you stay, the more clearly you begin to hear your own voice beneath the noise. The more you begin to distinguish your real desires from the ones handed to you by fear, by comparison, by the pressure to always be in motion. Sometimes the search was never about finding something outside of you. It was about giving yourself permission to feel what you already know but haven't been able to hold, that you're tired, that you're scared, that you want something deeper than just success or clarity, that you want peace, you want presence, you want to come home to yourself. And maybe that's not a dramatic realization. Maybe it's not a sudden moment of clarity. Maybe it's just a quiet shift. The first time you allow yourself to stop performing, to stop striving, to sit with your life as it is and say, even here I can belong. You begin to see that the journey doesn't have to be loud to be real. It doesn't have to be impressive to be meaningful. You begin to value the days when nothing changes, but you feel more with yourself. You begin to honor the moments when your mind is quiet, not because it's empty, but because it's no longer trying to escape. And you begin to feel what it's like to live without the constant question, what am I missing? Because you're not missing. You're right here. You always have been. This doesn't mean the search ends, but it becomes less anxious, less frantic, less tied to identity. You no longer define yourself by how much you're seeking. Instead, you learn to carry your questions gently. You explore because you're curious, not because you're broken. You imagine new possibilities because they excite you, not because you need them to fix you. There's a calm confidence that grows out of this, not the kind that comes from knowing all the answers, but the kind that comes from knowing you can trust yourself, even when you don't. You stop fearing uncertainty. You stop needing every step to prove something. You stop outsourcing your peace to a future you haven't reached yet. And in that space, you begin to live differently. You show up to your relationships with more presence because you're not trying to make them complete you. You pursue goals with more clarity because you're not trying to use them to outrun shame. You rest without guilt because you've stopped believing that motion equals value. And most importantly, you begin to see yourself, not as a project or a puzzle or a problem to solve, but as a person, a full, complex, evolving human being who is allowed to live in process, who is allowed to want things and change their mind, who is allowed to explore without losing themselves, who is allowed to stay without feeling stuck. This is where the story starts to change. Not because you've found the answer, but because you've stopped looking for one that makes you worthy. Because you've remembered something deeper than clarity, connection. Because you've come home, not to a perfect life, but to your own presence within it. There's another side to the experience of always searching that often gets overlooked, the way it shapes your sense of stability. Many people who live in a constant state of seeking have difficulty building long-term structures in their life. Not because they lack discipline or commitment, but because staying still can feel threatening to their identity. To stay in one job, one place, one version of themselves for too long might start to feel like stagnation. And stagnation for someone who has always linked movement with growth can feel almost intolerable. So they move, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes mentally, even when nothing is wrong, even when there is peace. Because peace, too, can feel unfamiliar. The nervous system becomes so used to the pattern of striving, stretching, imagining, and restarting that stability feels foreign. It's not that they don't want stability, it's that it hasn't always been safe. Somewhere deep inside, there's a belief that the moment things get calm, something is going to change. That the calm is temporary, that the safety will vanish. So they don't let themselves relax into it. They stay slightly tense, slightly alert, ready to search again at a moment's notice. This creates an inner environment where nothing ever quite feels real. Even good things can feel like placeholders. Achievements don't fully land. Relationships feel like chapters that might close at any time. Plans feel like drafts, not decisions. And because of this, the present is never fully lived. It's observed but not absorbed, touched but not trusted. And without trust, nothing really settles. This sense of internal impermanence can lead to patterns that are difficult to name but easy to feel. You may find yourself committing to something, a project, a role, a relationship, and then doubting it almost immediately. Not because anything is wrong, but because your internal system expects things to shift. You've trained yourself to expect change, to anticipate disruption, to stay light on your feet emotionally just in case. This expectation of disruption becomes part of how you regulate your emotions. You manage hope by keeping it low. You manage disappointment by preparing for it in advance. You stay flexible, not always out of freedom, but out of fear. The fear that if you really let yourself feel rooted, you'll be caught off guard when the ground moves. And yet, beneath all of this, there is a longing for something solid, for a life that feels like your own, for a sense of home, not just in a place or with a person, but in your own nervous system. A home that doesn't depend on perfection, but on presence. A home where you're allowed to stay. This longing is often buried under years of movement. It doesn't always speak in loud voices. Sometimes it shows up as a subtle ache when you see someone at peace with themselves. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet wish that you didn't have to keep reinventing yourself. Sometimes it lives in the gap between how your life looks and how it feels. And acknowledging that longing can be uncomfortable. It means facing the parts of you that don't know how to stop. The parts that learned early on that survival means motion. That if you're always becoming, you don't have to fully confront what you are. But here's the thing. Those parts of you are not wrong. They helped you cope. They helped you stay in motion when motion was necessary. They gave you the strength to imagine a better life, to search for more, to evolve. They did their job. And now they're tired. They're waiting for permission to stop scanning, to stop comparing, to stop holding everything together. That permission can only come from you. It doesn't require a dramatic decision. It doesn't mean you stop being ambitious or curious. It just means that you begin to offer yourself what the search could never give you. Rootedness. Not as a fixed identity, but as an inner posture. A way of standing in your own life that says, even if I change tomorrow, I'm allowed to be here today. That shift from constant forward orientation to present-centered awareness is not easy. It requires you to build trust with your own nervous system again, to show yourself slowly that stillness is not dangerous, that you can rest without falling behind, that you can stay without losing your edge, that you can be still and still be growing. This doesn't mean you have to stop dreaming or imagining. It just means your dreams stop hijacking your ability to be here. You stop deferring your peace until someday you stop placing your sense of self just beyond the horizon. You bring it closer, into your breath, into your routines, into your conversations, into the way you speak to yourself in quiet moments. And in doing so, you begin to write a new story, a story where you are not defined by your movement, a story where your life is not a problem to solve, a story where you are no longer living in response to what's missing, but in relationship with what's real. You may still have questions. You may still wonder what comes next. That's okay. Curiosity is not the problem. It's the anxiety behind the curiosity that needs your attention. And when you tend to that anxiety, when you soothe the part of you that's afraid to be still, you free yourself to explore from a place of trust, not panic, from desire, not deficit. And in that freedom, the world opens differently, not wider, but deeper, not louder, but truer, not in front of you, but right here where you are. Sometimes the shift away from compulsive searching happens not because you choose it, but because life forces it. A loss, a burnout, a major transition that leaves you without a plan. In those moments, you might find yourself too exhausted to keep chasing, too disoriented to form a vision. The mental frameworks you used to rely on stop working. The future feels blank, and instead of feeling inspired to search again, you feel still. Not because you're at peace, but because there's nowhere left to run. At first, this kind of stillness can feel like failure, like something has broken inside you. You may feel unmotivated, uncertain, detached from your old goals. You might think you've lost your drive. But often, what you've lost is not your drive. It's the illusion that constant movement was the only way to feel valuable. What you're experiencing is a nervous system that's finally too tired to stay in survival mode. And what looks like apathy may actually be the early stages of healing. It's in this space, this quiet, unplanned pause, that something new begins to emerge. Not right away, not with fireworks or clarity, but slowly, subtly. You begin to feel small moments of presence that don't demand performance. You begin to notice that you can exist without striving, that you can feel alive without running toward the next thing, that there is something stable underneath all the movement, like a self that has been there all along waiting for you to come home. This experience is often disorienting because it challenges everything you've believed about your worth. If you're not achieving, performing, evolving, or fixing, who are you? What do you have to offer? But over time, the answer starts to change. You realize that you were never valuable because you were searching. You were always valuable. The search was just your way of trying to feel safe enough to believe it. And from that realization, a different kind of growth becomes possible. Not the dramatic kind, not the overnight transformation, but the kind that unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly. You start to choose things not because they'll fix you, but because they feel aligned. You say no to things that pull you back into urgency. You say yes to things that support your peace. You let go of the pressure to constantly redefine yourself. You begin to believe deeply that you are allowed to be who you are right now, even as you continue to grow. This kind of growth is harder to track. It doesn't always come with milestones or achievements. Sometimes it looks like doing less. Sometimes it looks like not knowing. Sometimes it looks like rest. But its effects are profound. You begin to feel more resilient, more spacious, more connected. Not because you've reached a final version of yourself, but because you've stopped treating your life like a project that needs to be constantly managed. This shift also changes the way you relate to others when you're no longer projecting your unfinished search onto your relationships. You can connect more authentically. You stop expecting other people to resolve your inner restlessness. You stop placing the burden of your peace onto external sources. You begin to show up not as someone who needs others to complete you, but as someone who wants to meet others from a place of wholeness. And that changes everything. Your conversations become more honest. Your boundaries become clearer. Your presence becomes stronger. Because you are no longer split between where you are and where you think you should be. You're here. And from here, real connection can happen. You may still feel the pull to search sometimes. That's okay. The urge doesn't vanish. But your relationship to it changes. It no longer controls you. You can see it, name it, and decide what to do with it. You can say, this is the part of me that thinks I need to become someone else to be okay. I don't have to follow that right now. And in that choice, you reclaim your energy. You return to yourself. This is what inner freedom feels like. Not the absence of searching, but the presence of choice. You are no longer moved only by the need to fix or find. You are moved by what feels true, kind, and meaningful. You live not in reaction to what's missing, but in relationship with what matters. And that's when you realize the point was never to find the perfect path. The point was to become someone who can walk any path with presence. Someone who can pause without panic. Someone who can be still without shame. Someone who can change not out of fear, but from a quiet trust in their own unfolding. This is the journey behind the search. Not the search for something out there, but the return to something in here, something whole, something steady, something true. Another subtle but powerful aspect of the constant search is how it affects your relationship with self-expression. When you're always in a state of becoming, it can feel risky to express who you are right now. You might hesitate to create, to speak, to share, because a voice inside whispers, what if this isn't me? What if I change again? What if I look back and cringe? That uncertainty can paralyze your ability to engage with the world in the present. You're caught between wanting to show up fully and wanting to wait until you're more ready. This creates a tension between visibility and vulnerability. You want to be seen, but you also want to control how you're seen. You want to be authentic, but you're not sure which version of you is most authentic. You want to create, but you fear your creations will become outdated as you evolve. So you wait, you refine, you prepare, and sometimes you never quite begin. This is one of the quiet costs of always searching. It delays the joy of contribution. It tells you that your voice will matter more once it's perfectly aligned. But alignment isn't a fixed point. It's a moving relationship between your inner world and your outer expression. And often it's only through expression that clarity arrives. You learn who you are by letting yourself be visible. Not later, not after, but now, in your current form. Even if it changes. Especially because it will. This is why giving yourself permission to create while in process is so powerful. You stop treating your evolution like a private project and start letting it breathe. You stop waiting for certainty before you speak. You begin to understand that vulnerability is not a risk you take after you're finished growing. It's a bridge you cross to grow more deeply. This mindset shift also allows you to connect with others more meaningfully. When you stop performing your identity and start inhabiting it, you make space for others to do the same. Your honesty invites their honesty. Your presence gives them permission to pause. Your willingness to be seen in progress reminds them that they don't have to be perfect to belong. And all of this begins with the decision to stop deferring your life until it makes more sense. To stop hiding behind the idea that someday you'll be ready. To recognize that you're not here to present a final version of yourself. You're here to live, to express, to engage, to explore. Not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who is learning to stay present with the questions. This shift also impacts the way you relate to failure. When your identity is built around the search, mistakes can feel threatening. A wrong move feels like wasted time. A dead end feels like regression. But when you ground yourself in presence, failure loses its power to define you. It becomes information, not identity. You don't have to interpret every setback as a sign that you're off course. Sometimes it's just part of the course. And when you really internalize that nuance, when you stop requiring perfection from yourself in order to feel safe, you start to take more creative risks. You begin to explore paths, not because you're sure they're right, but because they feel alive. You become less concerned with whether each step is optimal and more interested in whether it's honest. You trade the illusion of control for the reality of connection. You also begin to unhook from external timelines. One of the most exhausting parts of the search is the invisible pressure of being behind, as if everyone else has figured something out that you missed. But when you come back to your own pace, your real internal rhythm, you start to feel time differently. You realize that life is not a race, and you are not late. You are simply here. And from here, you get to move forward. Not according to a plan, but according to your own alignment. And sometimes, forward means slowing down. Sometimes it means letting go. Sometimes it means returning to something you once abandoned. But now see, with new eyes, sometimes it means doing the next right thing, even if it's small, even if no one sees it. That kind of movement, quiet, grounded, honest, is what builds a meaningful life over time. Not the endless leap toward reinvention, not the constant pressure to arrive, but the gentle practice of showing up as you are, trusting that who you are today is not a draft. It's a life, a real one, a worthy one. And in that realization, the search loses its grip. Not because you've stopped evolving, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself along the way. Sometimes the search disguises itself as productivity. You stay busy, not because everything you're doing is meaningful, but because the act of doing itself creates a sense of direction. You make plans, set goals, outline new strategies, reorganize, rebrand, refine. It feels like forward motion. And in many ways, it is. But if you pause and ask yourself why you're doing it, the answer is often less about inspiration and more about unease. You're moving to avoid the discomfort of not knowing. You're building momentum, hoping that eventually it will carry you somewhere that feels right, This kind of busyness can look impressive from the outside. People may admire your drive, your versatility, your ambition. But on the inside, you might feel scattered, disconnected, like you're always several steps removed from something solid. Because the truth is, when the engine of your productivity is anxiety, you may go far, but you rarely feel at home where you land. This is why so many people describe achieving a long-awaited goal only to feel empty afterward. The journey was full of activity, but the destination didn't deliver the emotional resolution they expected. It's not that the goal was wrong. It's that the goal was never meant to resolve something internal. You can't fix an inner disconnection with an external milestone. And yet we keep trying because the trying world rewards action. It praises people who are always building, scaling, evolving. It rarely tells you to stop and ask if you're okay. It rarely encourages you to look at the emotional fuel behind your efforts. It rarely celebrates stillness, reflection, or the courage to pause. But deep growth often begins there, in the pause. In the moment you stop asking, "What should I be doing?" and start asking, "What am I avoiding by staying busy?" That question doesn't lead to immediate answers. In fact, it may lead to even more uncertainty. But what it does is bring you back into contact with yourself. It helps you distinguish between movement and momentum, between urgency and inspiration, between surviving and choosing. This kind of honesty is uncomfortable at first. If your identity has been shaped around being productive, slowing down may feel like self-abandonment. But with time, you start to see that true self-abandonment happens, not when you pause, but when you push yourself to keep going just to avoid feeling. When you override your emotional needs in favor of appearing on track. And when you stop doing that, when you allow yourself to not know, to rest, to reflect, you open space for something deeper to emerge. You begin to feel what you actually want, beneath the noise of what you think you're supposed to want. You begin to hear your own voice again, quiet and steady under the layers of performance. And that voice may not speak in big declarations. It may just say, "You're tired. You need rest," or "This doesn't feel good anymore," or "You've been trying to prove something for so long, you forgot what you actually enjoy." These realizations don't mean the search was a mistake. They mean it has done its job. It led you back to yourself. Because that's what the deepest searches are really about. Not finding the perfect plan. Not finally becoming someone else. But remembering who you were before the world told you to keep running. Before fear made you believe you had to earn your place. Before anxiety taught you to move faster than your feelings. When you return to this place, you might find it unfamiliar at first. You've spent so much time out there, in the future, in the next idea, in the next identity, that being here can feel strange. But the more you stay, the more you remember how to live from this space, how to move from clarity instead of panic, how to act from choice instead of reaction, how to be with yourself instead of managing yourself. And this has ripple effects across every area of your life. You stop saying yes to things that drain you just because they fit the image of who you think you should be. You stop chasing outcomes that look good but feel hollow. You stop trying to fix emotions that are not problems, but messengers. You begin to experience a different kind of progress, one that isn't measured by how much you've accomplished, but by how connected you feel to yourself, to others, to the moment you're in. And over time, that connection becomes your compass. It guides you, not by pressure, but by resonance. Not by obligation, but by inner knowing. Not by fear of missing out, but by a deep trust that what's meant for you will feel like peace, not panic. This is not a one-time shift. It's a practice, a reorientation, a quiet, ongoing choice to live from your center, even when the world tells you to keep searching outward, even when the old patterns resurface, even when uncertainty knocks again, because now you know something you didn't before, that the answer was never out there. It was always found in the way you return to yourself. There's a quiet kind of courage required to stop searching, not because the search itself is bad, but because it's become familiar, safe even. Letting go of it can feel like letting go of the structure that's held you together. And yet, over time, you begin to notice that what once gave you direction is starting to take more than it gives. That the search, once full of curiosity and excitement, now feels more like a burden, a pressure, a subtle but constant signal that you are not quite there. This moment, like the one where the search begins to wear thin, is a crossroads. You can keep going, pushing forward, hoping the next version of the search will be the one that finally satisfies. Or you can pause, not to give up, not to retreat, but to listen, to ask yourself, what if I already am what I've been looking for? It sounds like a cliche, but often the truth is simple. You've built an entire identity around becoming, around pursuit, around the horizon. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that the person doing the searching is not incomplete, just unseen, just unheard, just waiting for you to turn inward instead of away. That inward turn can feel strange, especially if you've been taught that self-reflection is indulgent, or that stillness is laziness, or that rest is something you earn only after achievement. But the most transformative growth doesn't come from chasing more. It comes from relating differently to what already is. This includes the parts of you you've tried to grow out of, the patterns you've judged, the emotions you've avoided, the chapters you wish had ended differently. When you stop searching for something to replace those parts and start holding them with care, something shifts. You stop editing yourself and begin integrating. You stop segmenting your identity into before and after and begin living fully in the now. This is not about perfection. It's not about reaching some enlightened state where you no longer desire, no longer seek, no longer change. It's about learning how to desire without disconnecting, how to seek without abandoning yourself, how to change without rejecting where you are. That is real maturity, not the absence of questions, but the presence of compassion as you ask them. This shift doesn't mean you stop growing. It means you stop tying your worth to growth. You stop measuring your progress by how far you are from where you were. You start measuring it by how present you are with who you are now. You stop asking if you've arrived and start noticing that you never actually left. The search becomes less about improvement and more about alignment, less about fixing, more about unfolding. You let go of the idea that peace is a place you'll reach once everything clicks. You begin to realize it's a practice, a way of showing up, a choice made over and over to return to yourself in this moment without judgment. And when you live this way, your goals change. Not necessarily in content, but in tone. You still want things. You still dream. But your wanting is no longer desperate. It's no longer fueled by the need to prove or fix or outrun. It becomes lighter, more spacious, Your desires become expressions of who you are, not requirements for becoming someone else. This changes the way you pursue them. You stop sprinting, you move with rhythm. You make decisions not based on urgency, but on congruence. You choose paths not because they'll complete you, but because they reflect you. And even when you don't know the next step, you're not shaken in the same way, because uncertainty no longer threatens your identity. You're not defined by what's ahead. You're anchored in what's within. That makes you more adaptable, more resilient, more able to navigate life's inevitable shifts without losing yourself in the process. You also begin to hold more grace for others. When you stop demanding that your own path always makes sense, you stop needing everyone else to have it figured out. You can sit with someone in their searching without rushing them toward clarity. You can witness their questions without offering quick answers. You can love people where they are because you've finally learned how to do that for yourself. And that's what makes this shift so powerful. It doesn't just make your own life feel more whole. It allows you to show up differently in the lives of others. More grounded, more present, more available. Not because you've solved everything, but because you've stopped resisting what is. You've made peace with being a work in progress. That's not defeat. That's freedom. Freedom from the timeline that says you're behind. Freedom from the voice that says you're not enough. Freedom from the pressure to prove your worth. By constantly becoming more, you are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to be changing. You are allowed to search, but you are also allowed to rest. And maybe that's the most radical thing of all, to rest in the middle of the search, to sit down, to breathe, to say, this is enough for now, and to believe it. In the background of all this, the movement, the questioning, the reinvention, there's often a deep and very human desire to feel seen. Not just understood intellectually, but felt. To have someone look at your messy, searching, contradictory self and say, I see you. I see all of it. And you don't have to change for me to care about you. That kind of recognition can be more healing than any goal ever achieved, because it speaks to something primal. The part of us that wants connection more than certainty, belonging more than clarity. For people who are always searching, this longing for connection often goes unmet. Not because they're incapable of intimacy, but because they're rarely with themselves long enough to let someone else in. When you're always in motion, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you can begin to believe that you must reach a certain point of development before you deserve to be seen. That you must become your best self before you allow others to witness the present one. And so you protect yourself. You stay guarded. Not always in obvious ways, but in subtle ones. You deflect compliments. You downplay your needs. You intellectualize your feelings. You create distance not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear that if someone really saw you, they'd confirm what you're already afraid of, that you are not there yet. But what if connection doesn't require arrival? What if the people who can truly love you and truly see you are not looking for a finished product? What if they're looking for presence, honesty, openness? What if they're looking for someone who is real, not resolved? The more you allow yourself to be seen in your searching without apology or performance, the more you invite real connection. Not just support, but intimacy. Not just encouragement, but understanding. You stop leading with the version of yourself you think others will admire, and start leading with the version that's simply true, even when that version is uncertain, even when it's still in progress. And that's where mutual recognition begins. You realize you're not the only one who feels this way, that many of the people you admire are also wondering, also questioning, also waking up in the middle of the night with the sense that something is unresolved. The difference is not in whether they search, but in how gently they hold the parts of themselves that haven't arrived. That gentleness can be practiced. It starts with small things. The way you speak to yourself when you feel lost, the way you respond to a goal that didn't land, the way you stay with yourself during a wave of doubt instead of abandoning yourself emotionally. And over time, that practice becomes your foundation. It doesn't eliminate the search. It simply allows the search to happen without wounding you. It allows curiosity without collapse, growth without self-rejection, change without shame. This is how the emotional landscape begins to heal, not by fixing every question, but by changing the climate in which those questions are asked. You begin to create an internal space where it's okay not to know, where the goal is not to reach certainty, but to remain connected to yourself, even in uncertainty. And ironically, this is what makes real clarity possible, because clarity doesn't come from pressure. It comes from presence. It arrives not when you force it, but when you stop running from yourself. When you slow down enough to hear the difference between your conditioning and your truth, between what you were taught to want and what you actually want, between the urgency of your fears and the quiet knowing of your intuition. In that space, the next steps often become obvious, not because you chased them down, but because you created room for them to emerge. And even when they're not obvious, you're no longer afraid, because you know that clarity will come, not on a fixed schedule, but on a living one that moves with your healing, your timing, your truth. You begin to see the value in slow clarity, the kind that doesn't crash in, but rises like dawn, the kind that honors your pace, your softness, your humanity. And that changes everything. You no longer panic when the path ahead is unclear. You no longer shame yourself for needing time. You no longer measure your worth by how decisive you are. You trust the unfolding. You trust yourself within the unfolding. And that trust becomes the antidote to the pressure that's been driving your search all along. There's something else that emerges when the need to search softens, a quiet appreciation for what's already here. Not just in a gratitude list kind of way, but in a deep shift in how you see. You begin to notice the texture of your own life, the sounds that fill your mornings, the way light moves through your space, the particular rhythm of your thoughts on a slow afternoon, the way someone looks at you when you're not trying to impress them. None of it is dramatic. None of it gets you anywhere. And yet, all of it matters. This kind of noticing is not about settling. It's not about giving up on growth. It's about realizing that life is not something waiting for you at the end of the search. It's happening right now. And you get to choose how much of it you're willing to actually feel. When you live in constant pursuit, the present becomes something you move through on your way to something else. You brush past moments that don't seem relevant to your goals. You postpone joy until you've earned it. You delay rest until you've deserved it. But the more you pause, the more you realize that your life is not made up of the big breakthroughs. It's made up of these moments, the ones you were once too busy to fully feel. You begin to understand that the search, while useful at times, also robbed you of some of your own life. Not intentionally, not cruelly, but by always focusing your attention on a future version of reality that would supposedly be better, clearer, more aligned. You trained yourself to overlook the richness already available. This realization is not about guilt. It's about tenderness. It's about turning toward yourself and saying, it's okay, I didn't know, but I'm here now. And in that now, there is space to reclaim things, to remember parts of yourself that once felt too small to matter, to feel things more fully, to live more completely. It might start in quiet ways. You look at something familiar and see it differently. You sit with yourself without the impulse to fix. You let a day be ordinary and still feel like it was enough. These shifts may seem small from the outside, but internally, they're profound. They mark the beginning of a new relationship with reality, one in which your presence matters more than your progress, one in which being awake to your life becomes more important than optimizing it. You may find that you start to move through your days with less friction, not because everything is easy, but because you're not constantly negotiating with yourself about whether this moment is good enough to be worth your attention. You give it your attention simply because it is, because it's yours, and because deep down, you know you've missed too many moments already by looking ahead. This doesn't mean you stop having dreams or ambitions. It means your dreams stop stealing your presence. They become something you hold lightly with openness and joy, not something that crushes you under pressure. You start to see your future not as a place you need to race toward, but as a space that is being created by the way you live now. And when you live now, fully, gently, honestly, your future becomes less about escape and more about expansion. You begin to trust that you don't have to earn rest, that you don't have to justify pleasure, that you don't need a reason to feel whole. Wholeness, you realize, is not something you find at the end of the journey. It's something you remember piece by piece as you return to yourself. As you stop editing who you are to fit some ideal, as you stop searching for the version of yourself that will finally make you worthy of your own care. You are already worthy, not because of what you've achieved, not because of what you know, not because of where you're going, but because you are here. And you're trying, and you're learning how to be kind to yourself, even in the absence of certainty. And that's enough. Not forever, not perfectly, just for this moment, and then the next, and the next. Because that's all life ever really asks of you. Not to be ready or resolved or completely clear, but simply to show up as best you can, again and again with your whole self, even the parts that still feel unfinished, especially those. As your relationship with searching changes, something else starts to shift too. Your relationship with time. In the past, time may have felt like a countdown, like something you had to beat, something that could run out if you didn't find the right path quickly enough. You may have felt rushed by invisible benchmarks, pressured by comparisons, haunted by the sense that you were behind, even when no one could say exactly what you were behind on. This experience of time creates urgency, and urgency distorts everything. It makes rest feel irresponsible. It makes curiosity feel indulgent. It makes mistakes feel fatal. And it turns the natural unfolding of your life into a race you can't win, because the finish line keeps moving. The more you chase it, the farther it seems to go. But when you stop trying to catch up, when you stop measuring your life against imagined timelines, you begin to notice a different kind of time, a slower one, a softer one that moves in rhythms, not lines, one that opens rather than closes, one that doesn't rush you to become someone else, but meets you where you are. This is not the time of the clock. This is the time of the soul, the time of healing, the time of real integration. And it doesn't respond to pressure. It doesn't speed up because you're frustrated. It doesn't deliver answers just because you demand them. But it always moves, gently, quietly. Even when you can't see it, it's working beneath the surface. And when you begin to trust that, when you begin to align yourself with that deeper rhythm, everything feels less desperate. You still care. You still want things. But you no longer confuse delay with failure. You no longer interpret slowness as a sign that something's wrong. You understand that some seasons are about gathering, some are about releasing, some are about becoming still enough for something new to find you. This way of seeing time changes how you relate to your past, too. Instead of regretting all the things you didn't figure out earlier, you start to see that you were never late. You were just learning. And even if you repeated a pattern for longer than you wish you had, that, too, was part of the process. The lesson needed more time. Your nervous system needed more safety. Your soul needed more space. And now, because of that time, you're ready to see things differently. You can begin to feel pride, not just in your achievements, but in your capacity to keep going, to keep asking questions, even when it was hard, to keep returning to yourself, even when the world gave you reasons to disconnect. That persistence, not in the search, but in your willingness to stay present, becomes something you admire in yourself, not something you question. And your future? That begins to soften too. It no longer stands over you like a judge. It no longer looms as a threat. It becomes something you're moving with, not racing toward. A conversation, not a performance. A collaboration, not a test. And that shift, that internal release, gives you more space to be where you are without apology. Because you finally understand that the point was never to arrive at a single destination. It was to learn how to live here, now, in this body, in this moment, without holding your breath for the next thing. It was to feel, to notice, to engage, not just with ideas or goals, but with life itself, with people, with nature, with silence, with stillness, with the version of yourself that doesn't need to be upgraded before she's loved. This way of being doesn't make everything easy. There will still be questions, still be change, still be days where the old urgency creeps back in. But now you know how to meet those days differently. Not with panic, but with awareness. Not with self-rejection, but with care. Not with more searching, but with gentle returning. To what is real, to what is here, to what is enough. And that is what transforms a life. Not dramatic breakthroughs, but this slow, loving shift from becoming to being, from chasing to trusting, from always searching, to finally arriving again and again in yourself. There's a kind of peace that isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't announce itself with certainty. It often arrives in the in-between moment, when you're doing nothing in particular, when you're brushing your teeth, or walking outside or sitting quietly without reaching for a distraction. It arrives without permission, often when you've stopped trying to force clarity, and it whispers something that the search never could. You're already okay. That kind of peace is not the same as happiness. It doesn't mean you have everything you want. It doesn't mean life has resolved itself into perfect alignment. It means you're no longer fighting yourself. You're no longer resisting the moment. You're no longer delaying your sense of presence until the puzzle is solved. And from that peace, new insights begin to surface. You realize that many of the things you were searching for were not missing. They were just waiting to be noticed. A sense of connection hidden in your existing relationships, a sense of meaning embedded in the small acts of your daily life, a sense of identity, not as something you invent, but as something you inhabit. More and more fully, each day you stop trying to fix yourself. This doesn't make life frictionless, but it changes the way you experience that friction. You stop interpreting every obstacle as evidence that you're doing it wrong. You stop seeing every delay as a personal failure. You stop panicking when the map disappears because you've started trusting your ability to navigate even without clear directions. And that trust in yourself, that becomes your compass. It doesn't point you to one perfect destination. It just keeps you oriented, rooted, present. It reminds you that the goal is not to never search again. It's to know why you're searching and whether it's coming from fear or love. That difference matters. When you search from fear, everything feels urgent. Every option feels high stakes. Every moment feels like a test. You second guess your decisions. You doubt your pace. You pressure yourself to evolve even when you're tired. But when you search from love, it feels different. Your curiosity becomes expansive. Your uncertainty becomes softer. You move because something inside you is drawn forward, not because you're trying to outrun something behind you. You act from a place of wholeness, not absence. And when that shift becomes real, not just intellectually but emotionally, you don't stop growing. You grow in a different way. You grow in the direction of peace. You grow into a life that feels like it belongs to you, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. That honesty is what grounds you. You stop performing clarity you don't feel. You stop pretending to be further along than you are. You stop needing to be impressive in order to feel worthy. Instead, you get real with yourself, with others, with your desires. You learn how to speak honestly about where you are, even if it's messy, even if it's unresolved, even if it doesn't match the image of progress you once believed you had to maintain. And what you discover in that honesty is connection, real connection. Because people aren't drawn to your perfection. They're drawn to your presence, to your sincerity, to the courage it takes to be where you are fully. This changes the way you relate, the way you create, the way you lead. You stop needing control to feel safe. You stop needing praise to feel seen. You stop needing the future to feel like you matter. Because now, you've learned how to live in your own company, with patience, with tenderness, with enough softness to stay when things are uncertain. And that's what breaks the cycle. Not a perfect morning routine, not the latest book or system or idea, but this one truth, becoming real in your body. I don't have to keep running to be okay. I can slow down. I can be with myself. I can search and pause and return. without losing my worth in the process. That is what the search was trying to lead you to all along. Not an answer, but a relationship with yourself, with the world, with this moment. And now, here you are, still you, but maybe a little softer than before, maybe a little less urgent, maybe a little more willing to sit with the questions instead of rushing to solve them. You've spent a long time searching for clarity, for purpose, for the feeling that everything finally makes sense. And maybe for the first time, you're beginning to understand that the value was never just in what you were looking for, but in the kind of person you were becoming while you looked. You were becoming someone who could stay present in uncertainty, someone who could offer themselves compassion instead of critique, someone who could tell the difference between fear and intuition, someone who could trust the rhythm of their own unfolding, even when it didn't match anyone else's. You were becoming someone who knows that peace isn't something you find at the end of the road. It's something you learn to carry even while you're still on it. And that's the shift, the real one. Not that you've stopped searching, but that you no longer let the search define your identity. You've stopped tying your worth to whether you've arrived. You've stopped deferring your belonging until some future version of yourself emerges. You've made space to be whole now, even in your becoming, even in your unfolding, even in your doubt. This doesn't mean the future stops mattering. It just means the future stops stealing your life away from you. You're not waiting for permission anymore. You're not holding your breath until everything feels certain. You're here, breathing, softening, showing up. And that is more than enough. It means that when the questions return, and they will, you'll meet them differently, with patience, with curiosity, with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer sees confusion as a threat, but as part of the rhythm of being alive. It means that when the world tells you to hustle, to define yourself more clearly, to figure it out faster, you'll know how to pause, you'll know how to listen, you'll know that faster is not always truer, and that real answers don't respond to pressure. They respond to presence. And it means that when you meet others on their path, lost, hurried, searching, you won't try to fix them. You won't try to rush them through their becoming. You'll simply stand beside them, quietly reminding them what you've learned for yourself, that they are allowed to be here, even before they have everything figured out, that they are not alone in their questions, that nothing is wrong with them for feeling unfinished, that peace is possible, not someday, but now. And as you carry that wisdom with you, the search transforms. It becomes less of a chase and more of a conversation. It becomes less about what you need to find and more about how deeply you're willing to feel what's already present. You begin to understand that your life doesn't need to be redesigned from scratch. It needs to be re-inhabited with gentleness, with courage, with attention. So if you're still searching, that's okay. You're allowed to be in motion. But don't forget to rest along the way, to look around, to notice, to receive. Because the moments you're living now are not the prelude to your real life. They are your real life, and you are allowed to live it, not as someone endlessly incomplete, but as someone already worthy of peace, even in the midst of uncertainty. Good night, sleep well,